I've got a new, I think, fairly big role. I'm pretty happy about it. Fairly big role coming that'll be announced here pretty soon. It's going to allow me to do a little more media, which is going to be fun. So it's not a media job, but I'll be doing more media. So I'll be more on Twitter, I promise, moving forward, man. So
that's awesome. No, your contribution.
Can't announce it yet, so that's about it. But
yeah, wow. So for those of you tuning in right now, as we're counting up to the audio, a teaser from today's guest. All right, let's go ahead and start the real show in 3, 2, 1. Will DeVonta Smith's weight hurt his draft stock? That and more today on the couch. Eric Galko, get the news this morning. DeVonta Smith, 6 feet, 166 pounds, dripping wet. There ain't many that come along like that. Is this going to materially change where he goes in the draft?
Materially changed, no. I think NFL teams were aware that the weight was an issue. And I think sometimes, and this goes for us as well at Optimum Scouting, we are very heavy into understanding the context of numbers and how they may have, right? But it's very easy sometimes to get lost at like, hey, sometimes a 4.49 means a lot more than a 4.51, and it really shouldn't. It's 0.02 of a second. It shouldn't matter that much. And I think for NFL teams, NFL teams would have been almost concerned if DeVonta Smith weighed 190 pounds, right? More than they are that he's 166, right? So they know what he's played like. They've had his measurables for, I would say every team's had him for the last 2 years. Most teams had him since he was a high school senior. So they know his weight going in, and it won't materially change his draft stock. The question is, how many teams are going to be comfortable with the sub 180 pound potentially Z receiver, right? In the slot, I think we can kind of get away with it. And maybe Hollywood Brown is a comparable for a guy that can work. Certainly just 2 years ago, he was a first-round pick, and maybe he's not worth a first-round pick, but he's certainly been successful in the NFL. But the question NFL teams had on him is far beyond just a numerical weight representation. They knew it was going to be an issue no matter what.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things. It's like don't count it twice.
Right.
Eric Crocker brought up a good point this morning. Was okay. If you want to look at the weight, show me on film where you say if he was heavier, this play would have went differently, right? That's kind of how I look at Rondale Moore in the 5'7". It's like show me a play that if he was 5'9" instead of 5'7", he would have made that play. I mean,
and that's the question, right? It's like it's the nuance there, right? So if DeVonta Smith was 180 pounds, he's probably not a different player, right? I think when it comes to that, like, hey, if he was thicker, bigger at 195, he'd be better, I think, at working through contact. He'd be open quicker, late separation, right? One of his issues may be drops that some NFL teams have with him is drops. And I think, hey, if he was able to be more physical, get his shoulders around, not make every catch as dynamic as it looks, and maybe a bit easier for him, maybe that kind of correlates in effect. But you're right, being 166 is not different than 170. I think the question NFL teams will have for this, though, is can he get to 170? Alabama is a fantastic strength program, arguably one of the top 3 or 4 that I know of. And Oregon's one of the best, I think, and this is all personal opinion, but I know Oregon does a fantastic job. Bama does an outstanding job. Will he always be in the 160s, 170s his whole NFL career? Because that's where the injury questions may come up. Not like, will he be injury prone right now? But if you can't add consistent mass, that's where teams have to. But a lot of times spent on a weight that NFL teams already knew. And if the Eagles liked DeVonta Smith, they liked him a month ago, and they still like him today.
Right. He's going to be a top 20 pick. I mean, even on the low side of his range of outcomes.
Not 95% chance he's a top 20. I'm not guaranteed, but 90% chance the top 20 pick.
And basically what that shows you is he is an exception in some ways because, I mean, I was making the point with Dane Brugler yesterday in the comparison to Marvin Harrison. And Marvin Harrison went, like 19th or something like that? Yeah. Again, a top 20 pick. So when a player with that kind of BMI at wide receiver inspires an organization to say, yeah, we'll use a top 20 pick on him, then chances are there are other things about his game that transcend that. And certainly, it adds another layer, another story. Now, I don't want to talk about Mac Jones or the quarterbacks yet, although I'm excited to talk about that, even though I'm kind of obsessed about it and talking about it in every single show I do, because I know that we are more of one mind. Aside from the quarterbacks, Eric, because I just want to say, I'll just toot your horn. My wife was asking me this morning, who's going to be on the show? And I was just saying, well, this is Eric Galko, who, when most people were still absorbing that Kyler Murray was going to play football professionally, said unequivocally the Cardinals will take Murray number 1. It was like early February. You were way, way, way out on an island. And I took note because I know you, how unequivocal you were about it. And I knew, it was kind of a cat that ate the canary moment, but we all benefited from it. Anyway, my point is, what I like is you're not afraid to just stand out and say, the public is just very wrong about this. And not in a way that you say, well, they might be wrong, or we'll see, or it's possible. So tell me something where the draft media, the perception right now, a week before the draft, is wrong, and we will get corrected soon.
Yeah, Mac Jones will be the first overall pick. I'm just kidding. I'm gonna call Trevor Lawrence first overall pick again. But no, I think in terms of where people are wrong, I don't think people are wrong. It's so hard. I mean, and again, I'm privileged to have to work with teams a little bit, to know some team sports, so I gotta have some good context. Mock drafts are really hard for teams internally, right? So keep in mind, NFL teams do their own mock drafts. They do it not just for fun, although certainly it's a fun exercise for teams. Like everyone who follows football, whether you're an NFL GM, whether you just started watching football, loves mock drafts, right? Let's be clear about that. Everyone loves a mock draft, and teams do it, and they have trouble as well, and they know all the information about players, but trying to predict who's going to go where is very tough. I think what you can learn, though, is overall, hey, how teams are viewing these players. And DeVonta Smith comes up. And I think, and even 3-4 months ago, actually, Dane Brugler and I were talking, not on a podcast, just he and I talking because we're friends, 3 months ago, saying, hey, have you heard a team that thinks Devonta's going top 10 or Justin Fields going top 10? And that was a real question for a while on those two players. I don't think Devonta's going to go in the top 10. I'd be surprised, really surprised if he did. I don't think he'll go far beyond that. But I guess staying on his topic, that would be a surprise to me if he goes in the top 10. I think people probably shouldn't expect him to go 6th, let's say, or 7th. I think there are other options there. And I think for DeVonta, with kind of the weight question marks, and really just, is he a slot only? Is he Marvin Harrison? Because he's not Marvin Harrison and he's not Hollywood Brown. He's probably not an NFL player, which is scary to say in historical context. He may be an outlier, but if it's not an outlier, he's in trouble. But that's a player where, hey, I don't think teams are in the top 10 are going to take him as well. I do think, and I know people have asked about draft props. I know my buddy Justice Mosqueda lives in the draft prop world. Yeah. The Rashawn Slater versus Penei Sewell, I think it's 50-50 right now. I don't know who goes earlier. It's a very difficult question as well. I think linebacker is pretty wide open for a lot of reasons. Some teams love Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and if he goes top 10, top 11, I'm not going to be surprised if he's the first linebacker taken. Micah Parsons, some teams feel like we do on film, he's one of the better linebacker prospects we've seen. And other teams have questions about some character background stuff, which I don't have perfect context on, but I know they exist as well. And then some teams, like us, love Zaven Collins, and he might be the first linebacker taken. So I think linebacker, the top of the offensive tackle class, and then I think we're in store for a lot of surprises at receiver. I will say this, I'm pretty sure Devonta's going to go number 3, but I'm not positive, and I have not a good feel for who's going to go number 4 at receiver. I think we're going to see 5 or 6 receivers going round 1. So I'll leave that there, and then we can jump off wherever we want to from there.
Oh yeah, no, it's great because Dane and I were talking about this yesterday, and I think it's really starting to set in for people that this draft is unique because of the uncertainty at 3 and 4, which therefore creates a larger cloud of uncertainty about the whole first round. There was, what was it, last 2 or 3 days, these teams are having talks, or this team is fielding calls, and someone brought up, I can't remember who it was, and of course you would, at this point, any good organization would, but also where you started. Let's go back to where you started, Eric. Mock drafts, right? It's fun, but the NFL, yes, the NFL actually consumes and values our content, most importantly mock drafts, because they're as much grasping at all the information available and trying to integrate it like we are. That's what it reflects as an attempt. And then, as we've seen over the years, like the mock draft munchers, if you can boil that down to some sort of consensus or average, at least you know what to plan for. But there's so much more to plan for this year. There's so many more.
And I think one on mock drafts as well is the domino effect of how it affects day 2, day 3, I think is underappreciated, right? So let's say the Atlanta Falcons, for example, and let's say hypothetically that they love Trey Lance at 4, right? But they don't know if he's going to be there. And for the Atlanta Falcons, their three options may be take a franchise quarterback to develop behind Matt Ryan, take what a lot of people perceive as a unicorn prospect in Kyle Pitts, or for a team that has substantial cap implications, trade back and try to stockpile 2021, 2022 top 100 picks because they need 30 plus players in the next two draft classes to be on the roster or practice squad, which is a lot of players. Their cap situation is in tough shape. For the Falcons, you trying to get a mock draft right because you've got to know what the next 3 years look like, and that depends entirely on what the Niners do at 3. So that's a great example. One of I think the best examples of mock drafts in a while of where the scenarios really go. Because if they take Trey Lance at 4, they've got to look at round 2, round 3 of maybe trading back, maybe not getting another top 40 player on their board. How does that impact things? Kyle Pitts, where does that impact things? So that's a big one. And then obviously teams like in the middle of the teens area is always really important for mock drafts as well. Do the Chargers have to move up for Penei Sewell, Rashawn Slater? Can they stay put? What's that different valuation? So and again, how that affects day 2, day 3. So mock drafts are very important, I think, for teams more than just round 1, a lot more than round 1. But it really impacts day 2, especially because if you don't solve a need on day 1 and you don't make your move to get there, that really impacts what you're doing day 2. And believe me, NFL teams are going beyond first round mock drafts. They're saying, if we go here, if this guy goes off the board, that team doesn't need to tackle anymore. We can get our guy in round 2. It's a huge domino effect that I think people have to appreciate.
Yeah, it's good. The good organizations, look, it's how you would prepare for your fantasy draft.
Right.
The more scenarios you have pondered and you have at least some clarity or some foresight into how you want to handle that. We're just talking about a 10-minute clock in the first round. And I actually wanted to ask you a question because you mentioned, the Chargers trading up for one of these elite tackles. Yeah. And this draft, more than any other, I think because of how top heavy it is at quarterback, presents opportunities where you might get a player at 7 or 8 that normally would be a top 5 pick, that blue chip pick.
Yeah.
And but there's also that time of year, you will see a lot of studies, Eric. You'll see a lot of compiling results over time saying, and I saw it mentioned this morning, the idea that teams that trade up are generally overconfident. And trading down is in the majority of the time the better side of that trade. Is that a rule maybe we put aside for this draft because of the rare opportunity to trade up to 4 and get a quarterback that you might in a typical year take at 1 or 2, or trade up to 8 and take a tackle that in a typical year might be number 3 or number 4?
The way you phrase that, right? Are you overconfident? Right? Hey, am I sure Penei Sewell is that good? That's always the hard part, is that it's easy to find exceptions. And as my mind kind of goes to data, you're right. I mean, I've done a quick study for people on quarterback trading up, right? And every year that a team has traded into the top 10 since, I think 2000, we did it. Since 2000, every year it was a mistake, because if you just took a quarterback with every pick you traded, you would have gotten a better quarterback than the one you got, with the exception of Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs. Every time you would have got a better quarterback, right? So the theory is the Niners, if they just took a quarterback this year, next year, in 2022, they would have a better 2023. They'd have at least one of those guys be better than whoever they take at 3 this year, right? So it's very easy to be overconfident. I think this year is a little bit different, but I think NFL teams know that. For example, the Falcons have taken calls on non-quarterbacks. Hey, we want Kyle Pitts. What's it going to take? You're going to have to trade a future first-round pick to get Kyle Pitts, right? That's what it's going to take. It's not going to be a second, 2/3, whatever. It's going to be a future first-round pick, and then we'll get started. And I think that's a really bold move. Kyle Pitts is a fantastic player. There are NFL teams I know that are very diligent in their scouting. They have their board, not set, but in a good spot in October. And Kyle Pitts is one of those rare players over the last 4 or 5 years that they didn't have that high going early, and then now he's their top overall player, right? There's one team that had to change a lot of their strategy because of Kyle Pitts. And I make that clear because it's still trading up. And their NFL teams are like, we know this guy is probably going to be a Hall of Famer. I think DJ said it on a podcast, right, where he said, pick one player, Kyle Pitts is a Hall of Famer. They're almost positive Kyle Pitts is going to be a Hall of Famer, as sure as you can be. And even then, the data says you probably shouldn't trade up for him. So I think there will be overconfident teams. I think for teams that feel they're very close, the Chargers being one of them, feel that they're a left tackle away. Oftentimes they're not. But I think that spot of number 7 and number 8, one of those will get traded on draft day. I'd be floored if one of them wasn't traded, and it's going to be a fear team. I think moving up for Penei Sewell or Justin Fields. And again, we know historically those don't work, but a team will do it on draft day. I would, if I had to guess right now, I would say greater than 50% chance both of those picks are traded on draft day. But definitely, I feel very confident one of them will be for a team moving up for, again, Sewell or Justin Fields, whoever it may be.
Yeah, and there's, again, each one of those things has 3 or 4 different other implications.
Right.
Because, well, Detroit, it makes sense, right? It just makes sense for Brad Holmes to take the option that you're talking about for Atlanta, where really you're taking this asset and you're breaking it up into multiple assets because you have multiple needs. You're not in a good cap spot. You're turning the cruise ship around, and you need as much time and as many darts as you can.
They don't have that many picks, Detroit. They don't have that many picks, Detroit, either. They're not as draft. They're not like a standard 1 through 7. They're missing picks there as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Patricia and Quinn. Whereas with Atlanta, and I just want to go off just on a quick tangent on this, because you brought up Kyle Pitts, and you're right. I mean, I think that if it hasn't set in for folks, like the people who do this for a living say, I compared, I was on the FF astronaut show, Eric, and I compared him to Halley's Comet, because we're talking astronomy. I mean, it's just, you don't see many come this way like him. And it's almost like you say it's bold to trade up for Kyle Pitts. Well, maybe we should talk about how it's bold to not take him when you can, or how it's bold to not trade up for him when you can. I mean, what are draft picks? Draft picks are probabilities. Like you said, you're mentioning Hall of Famer before he's taking a snap on the field, which is usually thought of as a joke, like, ha, slow down, don't crown him yet, don't put him in the Hall of Fame yet. But we're just talking about this very soberly and saying this is the kind of prospect that he represents. And so it's great because you think about all these decisions, and this is kind of like, again, it intersects with the fantasy football mind, because you're just playing GM in your head and you're thinking about all the considerations, and what San Francisco has, what Atlanta has, are just some of the more fascinating flow chart decision trees for an organization, especially in Atlanta's case, a brand new organization regime. Because I was talking about this with Dane, like, if you take a quarterback, that's a 15-year decision. That's a 10 or 15-year decision. That's not just a 2 or 3 year decision.
Unless you're Rick Spielman, you have to quarterback in the top 5. You're gonna lose your job if that quarterback sucks. God bless Rick Spielman, the Vikings GM. He's drafted 4 quarterbacks in the first round and still keeps humming along. But outside of him, you take a quarterback in the first round, that's your guy. And the Atlanta piece, as you mentioned, Zig, again, we mentioned at the top earlier, the cap stuff is fascinating, right? So I tweeted the other day, if they just bring back Calvin Ridley on Kenny Galladay's deal, which I think is what he's going to get in the market next year, right? With a bigger salary cap, all of that stuff. If they just bring back him, they have to keep Julio, they have to keep Matt Ryan based on the cap hits, and Kyle Pitts, that's almost half their salary cap in 2022. So Kyle Pitts, being a generational player that he might be, you probably can't sign any free agents for like 3 years, right? If you take him, if you don't pick that pick. Whereas if you trade down to the teens, you can get 5 players for the contract that Kyle Pitts has. So the Falcons, again, I stress this. I think if Trey Lance is there at 4, by the way, I do think he's the pick. And I'd be surprised if he wasn't. Maybe whatever else. I know they like him a lot. Maybe, I don't know, they're bored. I don't know anything but detail, but I know that they like him and he's a fantastic fit for what they want to do. So the dynamic of, and that's why I think the 4th pick, if it is traded, won't be traded until the 3rd pick comes in. But I think that's where the holdup may be. But it's honestly the most fascinating draft pick I can remember in the last 2 decades, because there are so many tentacles that come from this. Of Pitts is maybe Calvin Johnson in terms of the safest or prospect, but then you kind of have this roster that's kind of in between a turnover and not a turnover. Your cap's in tough shape. You can't go sign anybody. You've got to hit on UDFAs like never before. A lot of dominoes that we can go into for an hour or so. But again, I stress people that like the mock draft, like, dive into Atlanta, because it's one of the most fascinating scenarios to go through in recent draft history.
And whatever the decision is made, whatever it is, and it may well be made truly in the moment, it will cause a chain reaction, and the organizations that with a shorter time frame have to make big decisions that are, I think, bolder and have more clarity will be rewarded. Yeah, and that's what I was talking about this with Dane yesterday too. The idea that the draft is this game that's set up to hopefully reward the things we want to reward, and it isn't necessarily about process or rigidity, because the phrase case by case basis came up when we talked about players that opted out in 2020 to take it on a case by case basis. The good organizations will know this is a case where you throw out the book and you trade up. This is a case where you don't have just rely on conventional wisdom. I wanted to ask you about something that Dane brought up just to inform some of this conversation, because he said the process is resolving itself later than it usually does because of no combine and visits and things like that. Do you think that's true? Do you think that there are teams like San Francisco watching the betting markets flip-flop around? Like San Francisco still deciding who they're going to take at 3, or teams much later to firm up their boards and thought processes than they have been in the past?
Yeah, I mean, on San Fran, from what I understand the situation, and I will say this, it's Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. I think only those two know. Genuinely, not like a cliche, like honestly, I think people on that staff don't have any idea. They know who might be one of 3 guys, but they really don't know, which is God bless them. That's impressive. But I know what I do know is that they had a prohibitive favorite when they made that trade, and I think it's only smart to say, hey, the draft starts with us. Right. We don't have to we can't make this pick until April 28th. Or whatever, April 29th. Let's just go through the process, utilize it. But I know I'm confident in saying they had a prohibitive favorite themselves. And I don't think it was Mac Jones. But I think going into that number 03 overall pick. But in terms of just teams in general preparing later, I think it was, I don't know, I'm not sure how Dane phrased it. I don't think it was a negative. And I'll put it this way. NFL teams usually for the last 20 years, right, have had a very strict schedule in terms of, and every team's a little bit different, but pretty much the same, right? You end the season in, if you're a non-playoff team, you end the season in January. You have a meeting a little bit to prepare for the All-Star game circuit and know who's going where. They're going in. Then after the All-Star game circuit, you have meetings in February where you kind of start building information, planning for the combine, what questions you want to ask, who you want to talk to, all that stuff. And then you have your pre-combine meetings for that week before the combine. Then you go to Indy, handle business there. Then you have meetings in March. Then you go to pro days, come back mid-April, whatever else. And I say all that because the combine not happening, I know teams that didn't have their league meetings, their team meetings until mid-March. And maybe, we don't know, maybe making decisions on your board later helps, right? Maybe it's like, we're closer to it. It might be a good thing. We've always talked about how the draft should be closer to the combine. Maybe it helps. And I think teams, there are teams that have, this is the first, like last 2 weeks, have had the first time on really substantial discussion on some players. And I don't think that's a negative. I don't think it's, part of it's COVID, right? Some teams are virtual and that hurts. Believe me, I've gotten so many venting stories on, I just sit on mute for 8 hours. We're just talking. We're not in a room. I can't leave, right? So, everybody hates Zoom in the NFL just like they do outside the NFL. But I don't think it's necessarily a negative, but I think we'll see. I think we'll see which teams took a chance to re-engineer the process and which teams maybe were slacking and lazy and didn't really appreciate all this stuff. But I don't think it's a negative. And I think a lot of teams I know got a chance to go through a lot of scenarios, got to really think about players. We train our staff at Optimum Scouting. You can't just watch film and write a report. You've got to think about who this guy is. Where does he fit? If he's not a starter, is he a rotational player, right? Where does he kind of fit? I think teams got a chance to do a lot more breathing on these players, more than just hustle, Senior Bowl or Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, Combine, Pro Days, quick meetings, drafts, right? Now it's a little more spread out. I think that may really help some teams.
Yeah.
We'll see though.
It kind of, Eric, you're talking about like every individual, and the challenge of the last year in COVID times. And again, you hope that it sets up some sort of system where the good things are rewarded. But it's funny, as you put it, because no combine this year. Like, I wonder if teams are going to figure out, maybe more teams will say that, wow, the combine actually took us off of picks more, or like putting too much weight in the combine data took us off of the right track instead of putting us on the right track. Or like you said, the teams take a step back, breathe, and maybe say, well, why does it have to be this way? Even though it has always been this way. I was saying to Dane yesterday, like, NFL teams are just superstitious. They don't like uncertainty. They don't like getting out of these routines. But as you said, it presents an opportunity to do it in a better way. One of the things I want to go back to that you've touched on a couple of times you said that, you were talking to Dane 3-4 months ago and you're asking, is Justin Fields a top 10 pick? And you mentioned Justin Fields as a player that could be traded up for at 7 or 8. Does this mean that you think that Fields is probably quarterback 4 at this point?
For me, I mean, first of all, I know Dane loves Fields, and Dane and I were kind of figuring out from a mock draft perspective, hey, who do you know is going to take him in the top 10? And I think that was kind of the question. And ironically, one team I think he and I both thought had interest was San Francisco, right? So that was 2 months ago. That was before the trade. But who knows if they take him or not? I'm not sure. But I think for me personally, that we've had, honestly, since October, I know I can't prove this. I can show some text of me and Dane or some NFL team saying this, but we've had Zach Wilson as in the same tier as Trevor Lawrence, and I lean Zach Wilson. We can go into a whole deal if we want there as well. Lean him as number 1, but he and Trevor are kind of those very unique, to tip my own cap, in the same category as Andrew Luck and Pat Mahomes for us historically. That's how I think those two players are coming into the draft process. And then below them is Fields and Lance. And really, just like with Wilson and Lawrence, we can go into who's 3, who's 4. They're just different players, right? And honestly, I think we don't appreciate sometimes how similar Mac Jones and Trey Lance really are, and how similar Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields really are, right? Schemes that fit Trevor Lawrence probably also fit Justin Fields. Teams that fit Mac Jones and Trey Lance, they're not very similar in the sense of like their styles, but their limitations, what you can see on film. And I think one thing I know on quarterback evaluations, I think NFL teams see as well, is you've got to just cut through as many throws that don't matter. Get rid of the plays that don't matter.
Yes.
Focus on those. And every team does it differently. I think we've got an outstanding process. I'm biased, but I think we've got a great process of doing that. But honestly, if you go through, we threw out a lot of throws for Mac Jones that just like, hey, this seems great, but it's not really doing things that matter. Trey Lance, same thing. Justin Fields in some areas, some of the same things. Trevor Lawrence. And this is a big reason why when people say we only played 1 year, and believe me, I love Kyler Murray, so I can see that too. 1 year when you play an offense that's either heavy in RPOs or screens RPOs is the big one. It's just really hard to see quality throws. And for Mac Jones, there's, maybe 7 throws a game that you're really getting a lot of. Same for Trey Lance. Maybe it's 4 for him. For Justin Fields sometimes, I think the Northwestern Indiana game, I pointed that to as a negative for him, and it was. There's also a lot of throws there that he got a chance to do some pretty impressive things. And I think it's not about saying who's good and bad. It's about isolating those throws correctly. And that's why, to not beat around the bush, we have Lance and Fields in the same tier. And I think, hey, if I've got more time for Trey Lance, I'd rather him. If I want to have Fields come in tomorrow and be my starter, I trust him way more than maybe even Zach Wilson in some degrees. But they're in the same category for us, and still very good prospects. Not quite the level of Lawrence, Wilson, Mahomes, Kyler, Luck. I think we had Darnold there as well. That's a mistake by me. But that kind of category, these guys are just below that, but still the same kind of upside. And Mac Jones is, let's say, at least 1 tier below those guys. At least
I want to dive into this. My heart,
be
still my beating heart. I'm really excited to dive into this topic that you opened up. But before that, I want to just, because you footnoted it very well. Darnold. Well, I mean, first of all, who knows if he doesn't go to the Jets? But when you say, it was a mistake, what? Just small, a little bit, like 50 words or less,
Yeah.
When you say what do you feel, or what do you see? Where was the disconnect on Darnold?
So it's a great question, because it actually ties into Trevor Lawrence. And I think a lot of teams that people I've talked with is Lawrence, because just the body type, people don't appreciate Darnold's a pretty good athlete. He still is. He can move really well. Is Lawrence more Andrew Luck or Sam Darnold? That's the spectrum we're on. And both were great players, but how safe, how consistent, accuracy, all that stuff. And I think Lawrence is more towards Darnold. As you know, that's a compliment in some ways still, that I think Darnold was that good coming out of college. And I think he can be a pretty strong player, right? The trade to Carolina is hard because of the contract, but in terms of talent, honestly, he might be the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in this draft if he was in it for us, maybe even 2nd. I don't know in the context. But I think the hard part about Darnold, which I've learned, is you've really got to focus. I talked to June Jones, who I know loves Mac Jones and Zach Wilson, and June kind of brings us home all the time, is that accuracy, especially down the field, is not about completions all the time, right? It's about, hey, is it in a place where that receiver, especially in college, because the NFL, the windows are smaller, the corners are longer, they're better, is that throw in a position where that receiver can make a catch and get upfield afterwards. And he cares a lot about that with his scheme, but just in general, it's good advice. And you look back at Sam Darnold, the throws are there, they're impressive. And even though he's off balance and throwing, it's about the ability for the receiver to make the catch cleanly and get upfield afterwards. And Darnold didn't quite have that often enough at USC. And I think that's one thing I miss on the evaluation, because I said he'll get better, it's not a problem. But what happens is in the NFL, when you are a little more off balance or the corners are a little better, those awesome throws go away. And I think for Trevor, that's my biggest concern on Trevor is, hey, is that placement absolutely there 20 yards downfield in a way that receivers can make a catch? And forget the ones where there's a free safety misses plays, right? We can always find plays of Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence throwing over free safeties. Again, keep in mind, they're playing with outstanding athletes sometimes. And the throws are impressive, not taken away. But kind of find those throws where, hey, you know what? Is the ball 18 inches away from this guy's eyesight that he can catch it, stay in balance, work upfield? I missed that on Darnold. And that's maybe a bit of why I have a little bit of pessimism on Trevor Lawrence, especially 20 yards or 15 yards outside the hash marks downfield.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to look back and say, what can we learn from this? Although, again, the second chapter with Darnold, Joe Brady, he's done some good things with quarterbacks. You know, it'll be interesting.
I'm bullish, by the way. I'm bullish. The contract will be tough to figure out, but I'm pretty bullish on Sam Darnold working out. Awesome weapons, outstanding offensive coordinator, and I think it's all ironic that if he has a good season, you're going to have to pay Darnold maybe more money than you want to, and Joe Brady's gone. So how do you do that? I don't know. That's a whole fascinating question as well. But.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have, I suppose.
Right.
Scott Fitterer, everyone talks about that offseason. The Seattle got Matt Flynn and Russell Wilson. I think Tavares Jackson. Just like let it all sort itself out. The Darnold move kind of represents that. I just think of Darnold's fresh face, and think it means that maybe he's still young enough and early enough in his development that he's not broken. Like the chorus of voices coming out saying Adam Gase was the problem, or at least was a part of the problem.
I love age discussions on players too. I watch the NBA all the time, and like Jason Tatum for the Celtics has been 20 years old for like 10 years now.
Right.
Sam Darnold being 23, like he'll be 23 for so long. But I mean, it's true. I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I listen to Chris Sims and a couple other people who are, play the position at quarterback, and sometimes going through battles is a good thing. Sometimes it's not. And I don't know if going through NFL battles is a good thing, but I'm rooting for Darnold. I think he's a good player. I talked with him in the draft process. I think he's an impressive guy. I think he's a genuine guy, despite having all what's handed him at USC. So I'm rooting for him, and I'm rooting for Carolina because that's a really impressive, I think, front office and coaching staff. But it'll be unique. There's not many guys that make that transition. We just saw Josh Rosen didn't quite make it a year and a half ago. So.
Yeah, Ryan Tannehill though. That's again Adam Gase. Gase, everybody. And it's just you want to reformat Sam Darnold's hard drive right now.
Yeah,
and just kind of start over. But let's get to the marquee topic here, because I think this is much bigger than this draft, and it's much bigger than any single evaluation. It's the point you brought up. It's beautiful. This is like put it on a slogan like we're running for president, Eric. Get rid of the plays that don't matter. Get rid of the plays that don't matter. Get rid of the plays that don't matter. I feel like I'm getting tensed up talking about this, Eric, because I feel like one of the biggest obstacles to us moving the draft evaluation conversation forward is that we're allowing plays to matter that shouldn't matter. Paul Perticchese and Matt Caracchio, love these guys. Saturday to Sunday, it's the concept of like, how do we take what's going on Saturday and then we transition into Sunday? And the draft evaluation process is asking the question in so much as you can glean watching a player, how their game is going to translate. Is this player going to be an asset or not? And like you said, it might be 4 throws, it might be 7 throws, it might be 10 throws, and it applies to every position. And this is where models that include production can get us off track, because production treats every yard the same. And not every yard is worth the same when you're talking about draft evaluation. Not every completion is worth the same when you're talking about draft evaluation. Things like PFF grades. I love what PFF has done. PFF has moved the whole conversation forward. I have nothing but love for PFF. But a PFF grade in some ways weighs every play equally. It doesn't say this play didn't reveal anything about how this player is going to play on Sundays.
Right.
But this play, and this is why we always talk about the idea of show me a player's worst game. Like, go tell me what his worst game was. That's where you're going to learn. Zach Wilson against Coastal Carolina. That's where you're going to really learn more about a player than the games when everything comes easy. The record-breaking games. And that's why we care about level of competition. But I think we could go farther, and there has to be a way to quantify this or codify this. So we could really throw out, like, right off the bat, we could probably throw out half the plays, and just say these plays don't matter. Go ahead.
I would say this is that I think I'm smiling because that's what we do. That's what our analytics does. I can't reveal those on the show. I have to kill you and cut the broadcast right away.
Proprietary trade secrets.
I think we do a good job because that's really important. And I would say this, just not to get on my soapbox for a second about Optimum Scouting, but one thing we focus on is perspective and bias. The most important thing in scouting, in my opinion, because I think we can train people. I've done this long enough where I think I can train somebody on how to scout. If you know football, I can teach you what to focus on, what to look for, all that stuff. But the good scouts are the ones that have perspective and eliminate bias. And almost always that comes with just experience, right? You can hate hearing the 20, 30-year-old scouts, but I've worked with them. They maybe don't speak on the detail that we want to speak with, but they're just right? They're just right all the time, or not all the time, but often, because they've seen these players before. They intuitively know how to look, but teaching perspective and bias is really hard. And one of the ways we do that, for example, is we focus extensively on the objective information. So that's whether it's production and framing it the right way, as you mentioned, player's background. We spend a lot of time on background. You should know the player's background, how that may impact on field. But in terms of isolating plays, why it matters is, for one, the college game and the NFL game are different, right? The biggest example is what I always go to is press coverage. Press coverage is about twice as more likely in the NFL than college for receivers. So in college, you should focus twice as much, in theory, arguably more, when these receivers are facing contact within 2 or 3 yards of the line of scrimmage. It just matters more because you're going to see it a lot more in the NFL. And you almost want to throw out the plays they're not seeing contact, because those plays are far less likely to happen in the NFL, right? And usually in the NFL, if you can't work through contact, not only in press, but the first 2 or 3 yards, you're screwed, right? That's where DeVonta Smith's great at it, but a lot of small guys aren't. That's a big concern. So the isolating of plays is not just about, in our opinion, it's not just about prioritizing things or weighing them correctly. It's about truly only focusing on some of those plays. And when I say throwing out plays of Justin Fields, I'm telling you that when we watch quarterbacks, I will turn my eyes away when I see an RPO, right? That's not like a multi-level read, because I know that, like, you know what? Justin Fields, he can throw a 15-yard, extended RPO. That's perfect. But I know that throw is easy. It's not allowing him to show all he can do in terms of his throwing ability. It's still, I guess, matters, but in terms of evaluating the quarterback, I don't care about it. And I know that may sound like harsh, but again, we throw out those RPO throws. Some of those throws are awesome. Some of them are inaccurate, but they're just at the college level. They don't translate to the NFL level in the same way. RPOs happen in the NFL, but it's a different window. It's a different timing. It's different, right? So when I say we throw out plays, I mean, we genuinely throw out plays, and we train our staff to ignore certain things, right? Ignore certain plays. When you're watching a cornerback, hey, you should notice if the quarterback is being pressured, because that will tell you a lot about that corner's plays, right? If that quarterback's off balance and that corner makes a play on the ball, it doesn't really matter. And I know it's hard to say sometimes, but it doesn't. And when I say hey, there are games that Trey Lance has 3 throws that I think you can, and Quincy Avery would probably hate me for saying this and disagree with me, but I say hey, you know what? There's 3 throws in that game against South Dakota State. There is. That's all I got. And I can spend a lot of time on those 3 plays, and I can write a paragraph about each play, probably what I can learn from it. And that's the goal, is also for the plays that matter to extract as much out of them as possible, not trying to draw conclusions that aren't there. But when you're watching offensive linemen and you're watching a play where they're in pass protection and XYZ is happening in our stuff, hey, watch this play for his ankle bend, his knee bend, his arms and his shoulders, and watch everything. So my point would be, hey, the good scouts know to really focus on those plays intuitively, and we train that aggressively to be hey, on the plays that matter, focus everything about them. On the plays that don't, honestly, just get rid of them. RPOs, quarterbacks, get rid of them. Don't matter, irrelevant.
Yeah.
They're like jumpers, like DeMar DeRozan jumpers in the NBA. They don't matter. They're terribly inefficient. They don't help you evaluate anything. Don't watch them.
No, it's beautiful. I mean, we're getting to that.
Death to the RPO.
Yeah, well, or just to the idea that we allow ourselves to be influenced by watching somebody do something that is ordinary in college. It just isn't a simulation of NFL football. So you don't learn anything about how that player is going to translate to NFL football. And I'd like that you bring up something as a hallmark fact to start with. Like, there's twice as much press coverage in the NFL. You can quantify some of these things. I mean, you could just do a side-by-side evaluation. I mean, a side-by-side comparison and say, these are situations you're going to face. That's why with quarterbacks, it's like play outside of structure, play under pressure, when you have to reset your feet, or, when you're passing lanes, arm slots have to all, this is why these things come up so much with Zach Wilson, because it's the ability to be adaptable or malleable to what the play presents, instead of operating just within this rigid structure, which isn't something that is as common in the NFL as it is. And then like you said, what makes a play matter. And I like it. You tease some good stuff. Actually, I think I got a little, I got a nice statement of the Optimum Scouting credo.
Forget it. Ignore it.
I know,
Don't
right?
use it.
No, it's great. You know what? No. You know what the idea that's popping through my head as you were saying that, Eric, is having somebody do a project that spans over years, taking somebody young and having them intern at all of these different scouting places, and then compiling what's the real ethos of each one of these places. Because I'm sure that there's similarities, but there's interesting differences. And it all goes back to what I've said before, even about our little world in fantasy football. It's just like a little academic department. There's interfighting, there's borrowing from each other's work, stealing from each other's work, tearing each other down. But at the same time, we're all trying to get at that same unknowable question. And, in the NFL, obviously, there's a lot more on the line. But I think that makes our stuff as valid or more valid because it's more fun. We're doing it more playfully. You also said, tell me if I'm wrong, you were on with Josh Norris, who's awesome.
Yeah.
The 10% chance that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be on the rosters this year.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I think,
love it.
I mean, the biggest example I think you go back to and looking at historical is when the Philadelphia Eagles signed and had Sam Bradford. Mm-hmm. And then they drafted Carson Wentz and they said Bradford would be there. It's just really hard when the whole organization knows who your next quarterback is going to be for that quarterback. And it's not hard. It's not about, forget the personality stuff. Like Jimmy Garoppolo can handle it. Jimmy Garoppolo he's a tough guy. He's been impressive every step of the way in his career. I've talked to him when he was at Eastern Illinois. He can handle it. It's not about handling it. It's about practice reps. It's about mentorship. It's about teammates, right? We saw it in Philadelphia this year with even Jalen Hurts and Carson Wentz. Teammates end up picking, and that hurts your culture, and that hurts how guys play. I mean, there's a lot of inherent stuff that happens, and you don't want to go, football guy mode, but it's just really hard when, hey, we've traded our next 3 first-round picks for insert player, but go ahead, Jimmy, we're rooting for you, right? They're not, and I think everyone knows that. And that's the hard part about this. And I think everyone, again, I know that the team had kind of mentally moved on in some ways from Jimmy after the season. Again, at the time, maybe not immediate. Now with the number three overall pick, maybe. But I think at the time, not necessarily. But I think this trade happening kind of accelerates that timeline. And it's uncommon for a team to move up that early and still have a quarterback who was the incumbent starter, who's still young. And I think the Niners and teams want to do right by players for future free agency decisions and say, hey, you know what, if we can't find a trade partner, let's move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. Let's give him a chance to start in Chicago or New England or wherever else, because we're not going to use him. It's not going to be a good value for him. He's not going to enjoy it. He's not going to be happy. The team's going to be unsure. The locker room's going to be confusing. Hey, if it is Trey Lance and Garoppolo are pretty different players, right? So you're kind of developing just like the Eagles and Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts, different offenses. It's just really hard. And for a Niners team that wants to win this year, the goal is going to be, let's say it's Trey Lance at 3, hypothetically. They're going to want to start planning ASAP for November, December. We got to hope Trey Lance is ready, and we want to be a Super Bowl team because we're talented enough. How do we plan for November, December, Trey Lance? And you can't really do that unless the starter, and that may be Nate Sudfeld, Nick Mullins, whoever else in the roster right now, you're better off having that guy try to get you to 500 until Trey Lance is ready or Justin Fields is ready before you do that. So, again, maybe it's a bold statement, but it's just really hard for all those other reasons to really keep Jimmy Garoppolo there. It's the same reason why you can't have Darnold and Zach Wilson there. It just it won't work, and we know that, and NFL teams know that, and NFL teams are smart enough to kind of wait. So they'll hold their cards. I think he does get traded. Not a lot of teams that have cap space left, but I think Garoppolo someplace else, hopefully for him by July, but I think closer to August makes more sense.
The reason this is so gratifying for me, Eric, I'm obsessed with the whole San Francisco Mac Jones thing. Like, something in my heart will be offended if they take Mac Jones. Like, I'll feel like, as a football fan, we were just denied something that we all deserve. And also on the Jimmy Garoppolo front, because this is all intertwined, and it's kind of this idea of how do rational decision makers act. As soon as the trade up happened, Eric, I thought, well, Garoppolo's gone. I mean, that just has to happen. There's nothing, like you said, you show no, it's a vote of no confidence in your quarterback when you trade 3 first-round picks to take his replacement, and everybody knows that. And I think Garoppolo, honestly, going back to the Super Bowl, probably had, I think his confidence has been shaken and he hasn't gotten it back, honestly. Just watching the way he plays, it wasn't just injuries. The season opener last year, he was terrible against the Cardinals. And I think that the move up for number 3 represents, we want something other than Jimmy Garoppolo. It's strong. It's a strong statement of something other than Garoppolo.
Keep in mind, they've made statements or talked about, or maybe it's been leaked in the media, that they don't think there's a difference sometimes between Nick Mullins and Jimmy Garoppolo.
Right.
And I think that I know they genuinely do really like Nick Mullins. They think he's that talented. I disagreed respectfully, but Kyle Shanahan's a smart guy and obviously knows what he's doing. But I think that kind of shows that, hey, when you have 2 quarterbacks you kind of like, you have 0 quarterbacks. It's why the trade up happens. But secondly, hey, if they're okay with Nick Mullins or it's close, you need to move on, not only the cap perspective, but again, I stress sometimes it's as basic as, let's do just right by Jimmy Garoppolo. He did help us. He was a leader for us. The Super Bowl, he got there with them. He was a part of that reason that they were in the Super Bowl, and the injury stuff, it may have been an ending here, but it doesn't mean to end in a terrible way, whether it's the agent, the player, all that stuff, future players. Taking care of a guy, I think, is the right way to go about it. So I think if it's Mac Jones, there's no reason to have Jimmy Garoppolo there. You take Mac Jones because the NFL ready. That's why you would do it. But even Trey Lance, I think we overestimate sometimes. It's great to have guys wait, but these guys are ready to go, and the offenses are easy enough. You can have these guys ready to go. Trey Lance can start day 1 in the NFL. Would I love it? Maybe not, but he could start day 1 in the NFL. I think all these guys can.
Yeah, especially in a Shanahan system.
Yeah.
And
scheme fit. Shanahan scheme fit. Everyone's a Shanahan scheme fit. So,
and what I've said is that if the Garoppolo is on the roster week 1 and they end up paying him, taking a $25 million cap hit or something like that, whoever they take at number 3 is going to replace him, like you said, by November, December anyway. So really, if they have any foresight whatsoever, like really, we've got 2 sanity tests here for the San Francisco organization with the number 3 pick and Mac Jones. Is he the pick or not? And then what do you do with Jimmy Garoppolo? Okay, one last thing I wanted to just touch on real quick that I think fits into our earlier discussion. You put a great tweet out there, and folks, follow Eric Galko, Galko. You should be already. The Josh Palmer tweet, and it fits right into our conversation about some plays matter more than others. That you broke down how he played against top competition in this draft. Do you think the NFL's taken notice? You have him in the top 10. Do you think there's a chance he goes in the top 10? You hinted at some wide receiver uncertainty.
I think there's a chance. I think that, like I said, after the top 3, it's Waddle and Chase. I think will go in the top 7, 8 picks. DeVonta Smith somewhere in the teens, and then you have the Terrence Marshall, Rashad Bateman. We don't like him that much, but Kadarius Toney, that's in mix, a lot of those guys. But I mentioned after that, I don't quite know where Josh Palmer is going to go. I think I've been trying to vouch for him. Not that I know the kid. I don't know who his agent is. I don't know the kid that well, but I just think he's, hey, if I'm going to put my name behind a guy, I think he's that type of player and just been consistent. I think, analytically, he doesn't grade out well for us. But one thing our analytics sometimes struggles to capture is how terrible a quarterback is. And I think that's the hard part for a guy like him. And just the consistency against those players, right? Catching every catchable ball his direction, finishing plays, and even the throws that were not catchable, right? You can see how Josh gets his shoulders around. He's in good position to make a catch if the ball was accurate. So that kind of context really does matter, I think, for receivers. I don't know if it matters a lot for NFL teams to take him in the 2nd round. I think we'll probably end up being higher on him than some NFL teams, but I feel pretty damn confident that he's going to be someone who can start at an X receiver spot or a Z receiver spot in the NFL. again as soon as week 1. And I think the Raiders, you see what, Brian Edwards, that was his name last year?
Yeah.
Everyone loved him as a possible plug-and-play starter in the 3rd round. I don't see how Josh Palmer is any worse than him in terms of plug-and-play starter. But I think that's what he might be in the NFL. So I'm not saying he's A.J. Brown. He's going to be a second-round pick who becomes he's not that dynamic talent-wise, and A.J. was way better as a prospect. But I think Palmer could be an NFL starter and be, a 900-yard receiver pretty quickly in the NFL. And who knows, maybe his skills are that impressive outside of that Tennessee offense that he is the next, A.J. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, who we underappreciate in the moment. But bullish on him. But people say it's a deep receiver class. I think it's lacking on the X and Z receiver guys. Mm-hmm. And I think he's one of the guys that can actually play out there.
Yeah, fit into a couple of things. A Canadian, right? Part of that record-breaking Canadian class that's coming, which is great because there's a deep love of football in Canada, and you like to get to see it.
There's more coming too. John Mechie's Canadian. I was talking to a CFL scout the other day. I mean, like, holy shit, there's a lot of Canadian guys that are coming out. We've got for next year's draft, we've got like 6 Canadian players who are draft eligible, who are draft-worthy picks for 2022's draft. So Canada.
Canada. I love it. These are it's all fascinating. Okay, we're into the off the rails section.
Yeah.
Just a couple of minutes. I don't think you and I have talked about this before. So let's geek out or at
long
least
snappers.
Revisit, right? Exactly. Well, actually LS, you got it. Law school. I don't know if I knew that you were a law school grad. I'm a law school grad too. Class of 2000 in Texas. How did the experience of law school help you be fitting in this football world?
Honestly, people ask why I went to law school, and I had obviously worked in the football space prior to law school and continue to do so. I'm sure no one knew when I was going to law school at the time when I was there. I did it because I wanted to and I could, and I had the flexibility that I can work in the football space and still do it. I think law school is outstanding, including for people who don't want to be lawyers. I think it's such a perspective building thing. I tell people all the time who want to work in sports and like, hey, should I go to law school or grad school? I think law school was able to change how I think about things. But I think, again, I mentioned my philosophies and law school shaped that of perspective and bias. That perspective thing in terms of thinking about the law, thinking about case law, how it fits together, building an argument, all of those dynamics that you just learn in law school are so valuable in terms of just thinking better. First off, having a JD, it makes me sound smarter on paper. Whether I am or not, I don't know, but I sound smarter on paper. But I think I'm able to think about things a bit more clearly and convey that information clearly and actually have kind of deep thoughts about it because I know how to kind of have a well-researched argument. And I think on top of law school, working with the XFL, I was the league's director of player personnel, but I was also employee like 10 or 11 and working with a startup football league. There's a lot of shit going on and a lot of stuff to do. And because I had a law background, I was able to, not necessarily have influence, but work on the player contract, work on these things and have that perspective. So if you want to work in sports, having the law school tool bag is an expensive tool to buy. And it's a very stressful tool to develop. But once you have it, it opens up and continues to open a lot of doors and opportunities for me to kind of have that perspective. So love law school. I got a chance to work with Andrew Brandt, who I'm still friendly with.
Oh, yeah.
At Villanova Law School. So that was a good relationship to build. But also, the people that go through law school and work in sports, there's not a ton of them. And there's a pretty close-knit community on those guys that do. So recommend it for people who want to work in sports and maybe don't quite know where they fit in yet.
Yes. And it's funny. You're like the positive, sunny outlook. I'm more negative in the sense that I think you're absolutely right that the framework that you have to build in law school to be a clear thinker and a clear communicator is useful in applying to anything in life, basically, and you're right too, that a JD makes you seem smarter. And that's the thing. I think that when you have almost any graduate degree, but especially a graduate degree like a JD, if you say you can do something, then people just believe you can do it.
Yeah.
If you say you can do it, then you must, and not some people can't do the things they say they can do. Some people are very prosperous out there saying they can do things that they can't do. That's a whole other topic, maybe a more interesting and better topic. But like you said, it's not cheap. And that's one of the things about law school. I'm sure you've seen law students banding together to sue law schools because they didn't get jobs. And the numbers were inaccurate when they would say this percentage of graduates get jobs, and there's a whole other layer there. But I do think that the world now allows, because you can go back to the history of American law, and there was a time that you didn't have to go to law school to take the bar and pass the bar, like in the 1800s. Like you could just learn on your own, be self-taught, pass the bar, and practice law. Why do we have law school as a requirement? Well, it's a barrier to entry. It's a way to control the number of lawyers. It's not necessarily because you can't be an effective lawyer unless you go through law school. But I think you're right that law school gives you that ability to build that framework to analyze anything, really.
Yep.
And on
the law school piece, so you mentioned about the cost. I mean, hey, it's important to mention, like, hey, I have privilege to be able to do that. I had some flexibility in my family and my background to do that. And that was a benefit that I had. I mean, I like to think part of it, I was able to, build the Optimum Scouting. So it's profitable able to do that, but certainly had some privilege to do that. But I think, and I tell people that just like if you want to work in sports or be in sports, it doesn't really help, right? It's almost a prerequisite no matter what. And I think being able to leverage the skills you learn, whether it's doing an internship, whether it's writing for a blog or a website, but not only doing it, but finding a way to leverage it. And I was always focused on, all right, what can this law degree help me do? How can I leverage this better? So law degrees are great if you want to work as a transactional lawyer or work in whatever else. But if you want to work in sports, you got to really market the hell out of yourself on, hey, I have these skills and I want to do this for you as well. But certainly I'm thankful that between, building Optimum Scouting, doing that first, as well as, having my own privilege and able to be in a good law school, get a small scholarship to be there and, have the ability to pay off that debt it's hard. Law school is expensive and difficult. And, I don't miss the nights of studying that kind of stuff as well. But again, I stress that I think personally it was beneficial for me and opened up doors that I now never have to worry about opening up because they've been opened in my 20s, was able to get them done, have it on my resume, slap that JD on the resume. Now I'm a smart person and I can do a lot more things now. So
yeah, get it out. Yeah, absolutely. Get it all out of the way.
Yeah.
Although I remember the older law students just laughing at us younger law students. Like, you don't know anything about life yet. You think this is hard. You think this is struggle. Just you wait. Quick hitter. What was your favorite class in law school?
Favorite class? I actually loved criminal law. Which I was a big fan of criminal law. I grew up watching Law and Order, so I obviously knew all those things and learning about depraved heart murder and men's, all that stuff was always fascinating. So I used to love criminal law, but I actually got an awesome class in law school about a mix of contract law and like negotiation. I love negotiating, and I've gotten pretty good at it, I think, in terms of doing that. And I did a lot of negotiating with the XFL, negotiating pretty much every contract we had with players, and that skill set helped a lot too. But having the ability to kind of use the law in terms of contract law as well as speaking about it and trying to get what you want, not being unscrupulous to use a legal term, but using it in a way to kind of get what you want was always my favorite classes. What was yours?
Yeah, understand. Oh,
I take you as a con law guy.
My con law professor was on the record saying she wishes she would have failed me. And after the first day of class, when she was
get her on the couch,
right? No, whenever the first day of class, she was very flowery about like federalism and how brilliant a document it was. And I came up to her after class and I said something about, well, should you mention the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, some of that idea came from the way Native nations, like Benjamin Franklin, people like that, observed this and said, that's a good idea. We should try to implement a system like that. And she was just like, we talked about strict construction and loose construction. I came up to her after class and I said, aren't these just things that people pick to support the argument that they believe is correct anyway, and nobody actually adheres to these schools? And she's like, oh yes, well, it's kind of embarrassing. Anyway, I liked classes. When Eric, at the orientation, I knew I wasn't going to be an attorney. I knew I wasn't going to be an attorney at the orientation before the first year started. But I don't say this to I had a scholarship, so I was able to be a professional student for a few years. I like literature and the law. When we read about like union organizing and things like that. I did do a criminal defense clinic where we had our training wheels and we got to go out there and be criminal defense attorneys. My father's a criminal defense attorney, a really good one. Retired, 54 years. He practiced law. Anyway, I couldn't negotiate, and I believed everything my clients told me. I was a terrible criminal defense attorney. Terrible. Anyway, see, this is where the real fun starts, but we're in the final minute, and I'm going to have to wind it up. It's always fun to get together with Eric Galko. Optimum Scouting is fantastic. Everything he contributes to the space, you need to check out. Shout out to Justice, like you said, too. One of the more brilliant minds in our circles. We like being in our circles for you, everybody, because your enthusiasm, and thanks everyone for turning out. We just under a week into the draft. People like Dane and Eric helping us be ready for that. And we like to do